praying for grace to understand. Spirit of Jesus, open our hearts to live and to love the gospel of the Lord.
Heart to Heart, a Catholic media ministry, presents an inspiring gospel reflection by Father Michael Sparrow. Father Michael is a Jesuit priest working as a writer and retreat master at the Bellarmine Jesuit Retreat House outside Chicago.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus departed from there and came to his native place, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished. They said, "Where does this man get all this? What kind of wisdom has been given to him? What mighty deeds are wrought by his hands? Is he not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his native place, and among his own kin, and in his own house." So he was not able to perform any mighty deeds there, apart from curing a few sick people by laying his hands on them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. The Gospel of the Lord. In today's Gospel from Mark chapter 6, Jesus returns to his hometown of Nazareth. And instead of a warm welcome, the people there took offense at him. In their eyes, he was just an upstart carpenter. And here he was preaching and teaching and purported to be doing mighty deeds. They took offense at him. He was a prophet without honor in his own home. And what was Jesus' reaction to their reaction? St. Mark writes, "He was not able to perform any mighty deeds there. He was amazed at their lack of faith." Might we say Jesus was discouraged? He came to his own, and his own rejected him. His values were not their values. We heard in our first reading from the book of Hebrews, from the letter to the Hebrews, these inspiring words: "Strive for peace with everyone, and for that holiness without which no one will see the Lord." Striving for peace. Isn't that what we all want? Isn't that what we're all seeking? But wait, what makes for peace? What personal actions? What political choices? There's a big hint in that same chapter 12 from the letter to the Hebrews. "See to it that no bitter root springs up and cause trouble, through which many become defiled." Be on guard against the bitter root springing up in our hearts. How you doing on that lately? Have you been chewing on any bitter roots? I know I've tasted more than a few in the past week. Many of us find ourselves very discouraged right now with our government. We, like Jesus, don't feel at home in our own home country. It's been quite a week of American politics, has it not? We witnessed a high and a low in the intersection of Catholic social teaching and political activity. A high point last Friday, January 27th, drew hundreds of thousands to the nation's capital on Friday to protest the 44th anniversary of the Supreme Court decision creating a constitutional right to an abortion. For the first time ever, the Vice President of the United States joined them. Legislation is now being prepared to permanently ban taxpayer dollars from going to fund abortions. And last night, President Trump nominated Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, a distinguished judge who has written eloquently against physician-assisted suicide and who is known for his conservative interpretation of the Constitution, which would appear to bode well for placing restrictions on abortions. This is where Catholic social teaching on the sacredness of life has lined up with President Trump's agenda. But on the very day that Vice President Pence spoke in favor of protecting life in a mother's womb, President Trump issued an executive order putting a temporary halt to the flow of immigrants and refugees from 7 predominantly Muslim countries, an indefinite ban on refugees fleeing war-torn Syria seeking asylum here in the U.S. The executive order has brought a storm of protest around the country and has dominated the news cycle since last Friday. The president has claimed that this will make our country safer and will protect us from potential terrorists by doing extreme vetting of those trying to enter this country. But our own Cardinal Cupich has condemned this action, is one of the first religious voices in the country to issue a very strong statement calling this not just a political issue, but a human rights issue. He wrote, and I quote, "The executive order to turn away refugees and to close our nation to those, particularly Muslims, fleeing violence, oppression, and persecution is contrary to both Catholic and American values. Have we not repeated the disastrous decisions of those in the past who turned away other people fleeing violence, leaving certain ethnicities and religions marginalized and excluded?" The Cardinal was not speaking alone because soon after the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops condemned this action in similar words. Even Pope Francis reacted sharply to the president's executive order, stating, and I quote, "All nations must focus on service to the poorest, the sick, and those who have abandoned their homelands in search of a better future for themselves and their families. It's hypocrisy to call yourself a Christian and chase away a refugee or someone seeking help, someone who is hungry or thirsty, toss out someone in need of my help. If I say I am a Christian, but do these things, I am a hypocrite." End quote. Jesus returns to his homeland, and his hometown takes offense at him. Are you offended when the church speaks out to protect the life of the unborn? Do you take offense when our cardinal, our bishops across the nation, and even our pope criticize the action of our president? What did the people in Nazareth say about Jesus? Where did he get all this? Don't we know his family? Tell him to shut his mouth. He's just a carpenter. Who is he to preach to us? If you're a liberal Catholic, you may want to say, yes, I'm a devout Catholic, and I don't believe in abortion personally, but it's a woman's right to choose. I can't push my personal morality on others that don't share our faith. And if you're a conservative Catholic, you might be tempted to say, of course, I care about the poor and refugees. But I agree with our president, we have to secure our borders and do our best to keep out all the terrorists before we can worry about others. America first. Or regardless of your political affiliation, you might put it more baldly. Cardinal Cupich, American bishops, Pope Francis, why are you dragging us into politics? Preach the gospel, not politics. Their reply is simple. I am preaching the gospel. If the gospel doesn't rub up against real life issues, I've got news for you. It's not the gospel. In fact, in his very first writing, The Joy of the Gospel, Pope Francis warns us against a narrow interpretation of religion that would keep us confined to the narrowness of the sanctuary. According to a poll cited by America Magazine this past week, only a small minority of churches across the nation preached on the refugee crisis. And yet, according to that same poll, 80% of American Catholics wished that their pastors had spoken about these issues. When referring to Catholic social teaching, our beloved Cardinal Bernardine coined the phrase, the seamless garment of life. This metaphor reminds us that we Catholics believe in the protection of life from conception to natural death and everything in between. Catholic means universal, and we are over 1.2 billion strong. That's more than half of the 2.2 billion Christians in the world. We are so much bigger than any one nation. So the gospel asks us, are we Catholics first? Are we Christians first? Or are we Americans first? This is not an academic question. Is it not a scandal that many of us who are strongly opposed to abortion do so little to actively care for the poor beyond lip service? We care a great deal when a poor mother is considering an abortion, but once she'd had her child, we abandon her to a cycle of poverty. This isn't a Catholic or a Christian response to the poor. And is it not a scandal that so many who advocate for the poor do so little to speak against tax dollars going to fund the abortion industry? An industry that has been exposed through undercover videos of profiting from taking advantage of vulnerable, frightened young women. Sitting in silence in the face of this injustice is not Christian. I think if we're really trying to live our faith, we will find Jesus pushing us all past our comfort zone, challenging us to love those we are not comfortable loving, asking questions we'd rather not ask. And they took offense at him. Sadly, one thing we can probably all agree on is that our nation is badly divided, and that bitter root is a steady diet for many of us. The point of this homily is not to condemn President Trump. If that's what you're hearing me saying, then you're not hearing me. What our bishops have stated quite clearly is that no political party fully represents Catholic social teaching. And there are certain major issues that must be preached from the pulpit. And when a given administration stands in violation of these Catholic values, then they must be challenged on these issues. Ad hominem arguments that belittle our opponents are not our Catholic way. But well-reasoned, carefully argued opinions rooted in Scripture and church teaching is our way, inside and outside the church. Which brings us back to the letter to the Hebrews. See to it that no one is deprived of the grace of God, that no bitter root spring up and cause trouble. Isn't it time that we do some weeding? Isn't it time that we beg God to shed his grace on all people, that no one be deprived, neither Christian, nor Muslim, nor Jew, nor Buddhist, nor Hindu, nor even atheist? Jesus disagreed sharply with those who opposed him. He called the Pharisees hypocrites to their faces, but he resisted nonviolently. He attacked their attitudes and their behavior, not their person, and he prayed for them as he hung on the cross. That's one difference, big difference, between Jesus and the rest of us. There was no bitter root in him. He loved his enemies. We as Americans have an obligation to participate in our democracy and to let our voices be heard. Remember the words of the 18th century Irish political philosopher Edmund Burke. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. As Catholics, this is not a time to do nothing. I urge you to raise your voice in protest against this executive order, temporarily halting or indefinitely halting the flow of immigrants and refugees. The bishops sponsor a website, www.justiceforimmigrants.org. On that page, there's a link to send a letter to President Trump and members of Congress. This is not simply a political issue, it's a moral issue. Cardinal Cupich ended his letter of protest by quoting Pope Francis in his challenging words to Congress in 2005 that should haunt us as we come to terms with the events of last week. Quote, "If we want security, let us give security. If we want life, let us give life. If we want opportunities, let us provide opportunities. The yardstick we use for others will be the yardstick which time will use for us." Amen.
Heart to heart, hand in hand, praying for grace to understand. Spirit of Jesus, open our hearts to live and to love the gospel